what I've come to realize is that, there are millions of people who are frustrated. Steve Schmidt calls them the great frustrated majority. And so, yeah, the entire descent of the firearms industry is wrapped up in 352 pages, which happens to be my book. But every day I get dozens of emails and direct messages and calls from people who are thankful that I'm doing it because they're frustrated in the same way that I'm frustrated. And so I don't feel alone in that. Like, I don't feel unique in that way. I mean, I feel unique in that I have the public stance, but I don't feel unique that I'm in America. I'm a unique American. So there's some people that have got out that have contacted me. Virtually no people that are in it have any sort of dissent, because the industry has become something that sort of beats dissent out of itself. Like, you either become this sort of cultish true believer, or you're not good enough to be in there, i.e. Jim Zumbo, i.e. Dick Metcalf. These people who, Zumbo, right, wrote 23 books, celebrity, signed autographs at trade shows, criticizes AR-15s, he's out, right? And so if you're in the industry for any period of time, maintaining any sort of freedom of thought becomes pretty difficult. And so I saw a lot of good people that know better either get out or kind of become converted to this sort of what I fear now is a dangerous kind of all or nothing-ism that is part of the NRA and the political right. And so, yes, I'm not getting a lot of outreach from inside the industry, and they've been pretty quiet about my book and that sort of stuff, I think very purposely so. We were worried about security things. We were worried about our boys going to school. We were worried about people on the Hill with rifles. We were worried about digital security, and for the most part, none of that stuff came to fruition. It's not that I don't get ugly comments. Trump Jr. attacked me, and I get some of that, but for the most part, it's positive. And it's been unbelievably overwhelming, to be really honest. And so we anticipated like 50 to 1 trolls to praise, and it's been 50 to 1 praise to trolls. So that's good, that's rewarding. That's why you write a book like that. I don't think that Kalispell's a lot different than a lot of other places in the country. There's a lot of self-sorting that's gone on, So amongst our core group of friends, fine, good. And we don't face public backlash. But I also, and to be fair, like we had 2 book events here. We had a book event in Whitefish, and the one in Whitefish was one of the best book events I've ever done anywhere in the country, and I've done them all over the country. So there's a lot of support, positive-wise here too, But I don't walk into Costco with my book on my shirt and expect to get pats on the back from everybody in Kalispell,
Yeah.
People, when they first hear about the book, think it's going to be some, just dialectical screed one particular way. But to me, it's like I'm trying to stand up for the great middle in America. Like, I'm not anti-gun.
Right.
I shoot and hunt with my boys every chance I get. I don't know how many guns I own. I am anti-radicalization. I'm anti this, whatever's happening to democracy and how guns are influencing. I'm anti that, but I'm not anti-gun in any way that I see. And so I think that's frustrating to some of the people who wanted to hate on the book or hate on me, because it's not like in fact, I don't really even feel like I've changed very much. I feel like things around me have changed a lot, but I don't feel like I've changed. I tried to, while I was inside the industry, stand up for things that I cared about. While I was in the industry, I was very careful not to dabble in any sort of gun politics or gun policy. I knew that was verboten. But things like environmental policy, political races like Senator Tester's race that I cared about, the Badger 2 medicine, extractive policies, conservation things. I did dabble in those, and I was careful, and that's a lot what the book's about. I figured out how to walk that line, but I also figured out that if I'm ever going to speak up and tell the truths that I need to tell, I had to untether myself from depending on income from the industry. But as long, and the industry is exceptionally good at that, like wrapping your entire life into to the gun industry. So your social circle becomes that, your friends become that, what you do on the weekends becomes that, like everything becomes that. And it's tough if you want to maintain a life inside that. You either have to be all of that or none of that. And I figured out, okay, if I'm going to tell the story, then I'm going to have to be none of it, because I can't. I will end up being Zumbo, or where I'll just be marginalized, and you just can't speak out that way. I don't know, something flipped in me in 2004 when it's a hard thing to realize that this thing that you were a part of and that you believed in, that you were being lied to, that everything you thought about it was being converted into something that was working against everything that you believed in. That happened to me when I did the press conference. I mean, Strouder was a part of that, right? The press conference for TU and several other organizations at the National Press Club, standing up against the Bush-Cheney energy plan. And when I did that, and then I was criticized by the industry for it, a switch flipped in me, and I thought, okay, I'm never again giving unthinking loyalty. I'm not this like 100% soldier where I'm going to do this and not and just be cultishly devoted about it, right? And once I did that, I had this. I felt like I was unique in the industry. I was in it. I wanted to succeed. I was proud of the company I was building. I liked building guns and selling guns and doing all that stuff, but I wasn't going to be devoted to it in the way that everybody else was. And so I had this sort of out of body. I was critical of it at the same time. And when you're in that for that long, being critical of it, like you start to see a lot of shit. Like you start to realize a lot of things that other people just let slip by that they think are normal, and that it's not at all normal. Like the man card campaign, the Bushmaster thing, and the way that the industry slid into being so influential in our politics and so dangerous now. I think I say in the book that the whole kind of frog in the boiling water thing, I kind of got out of the water. I mean, it was still there, and I was hovering around it, but I wasn't in that water anymore. And so as far as why me, I just think I just happen to be somebody who has decided to be critical of it while being in it at the same time. And that just doesn't happen in the gun industry or a few other entities like that. I just cared too much about this stuff. I couldn't stay quiet, and it's like when I started being somewhat critical of the industry and doing a few things, I didn't think I would end up, right? It wasn't because I had this end game. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to be this whistleblower type, which I don't really consider myself a whistleblower, but people call me that. Like that was never my outcome. It was just like once I decided I was going to stand up for the Badger and do the right thing, then I just decided, okay, I'm not going to do it and then stop doing it. I'm going to just stay on the path, and that path has led me here. And I wasn't going to look away from stuff that I knew was wrong. And now I'm worried, now I'm really worried how wrong it is. So, here I am, and it wasn't a plan. I didn't pick it. I didn't lay it. I mean, the book idea came about, I don't know, a year and a half before I left the industry or something, or a year. I was for the most part, I was a young kid in the industry, 20-something. And because I started at a very small company, I had a very impressive title, right? I was like an entry-level executive. Kimber was an upper echelon company. The success we got because it was like a Porsche, BMW, Jaguar. We built really nice stuff and sold really nice stuff, and we marketed in very, very desirable ways. And so people in the industry took notice of that because other executives in the industry, they wanted to own the stuff we made. They appreciated the way we marketed. And so we made lots of friends that way, and I got a lot of recognition because of that. And again, in an industry that was generally flatline or stagnant, to have a new company come in and create success, that was a notable thing. So people in the industry wanted to take notice of that. Again, it was just sort of luck on our part. And then the other thing was I helped develop a dealer direct sales method, which the industry had never done. They normally sold through two-step distribution. So the way in which we sold and the way in which I built the sales team was different than every other company. And so I got nominated for industry awards and the industry person of the year. I was a finalist a couple times for that. There were only 3 finalists in the industry. So these stars aligned to give me sort of a platform and an influence that I normally might not have got if I was just the average. Well, there were other 26 or 7 or 8 year olds, whatever, in the industry, and they didn't have that sort of platform. I did, so. I made the errant assumption when I got in that I think the industry had already started to change. The NRA had already started to mold the firearms industry into what would become, I think, not just a profit center, but a political tool. When I first got in, I didn't realize that, and I just, I was loyal to the industry in which I worked, and so, like when the Smith & Wesson agreement came out, I think that was in 1999. I helped orchestrate a boycott against Smith & Wesson, kind of on behalf of the industry, to penalize, and it almost ran Smith & Wesson out of business, and it cost the CEO his job. Ed Schultz was his name, and I look back at that as this. A lesson I learned, something I never wanted to do again, but I devoted unthinking loyalty to the industry just because I thought I should. I was in it. I wanted to make my mark. And I liken it a little bit like to the 18-year-old kids that ran in to sign up for war during World War II. You didn't ask. You didn't you just ran and did it. It was your patriotic duty. And I kind of felt that way for the first few years of the industry. And when I was in it, I did that. But by 2004, which is when I gave the press conference speech, and then especially towards 2007, as Obama started to lead in the polls, I realized okay, something's really going off the rails here. I had been foolishly all in, devoted to it, and I realized from then on that I would never do that again. I would never be a part of something and not question it at the same time. The thing that I am regretful for is the way in which free thought was squashed, and the way Ed Schultz was persecuted, and the way he was trolled out of a job, and the way the normal policy debates that should happen around something as important as this were squashed in favor of this kind of loud. Well, it's the same thing that anybody in Republican politics faces now, right? You say the wrong thing, you get trolled out of existence, you get persecuted. I feel like I sort of was a part of the first time that happened, and that's whatever part I played in setting that in motion. I regret that, because I think that's led to really disastrous outcomes for the country. The industry was set to learn its lessons, right? It was going to test its boundaries. The way the sort of authoritarian control structure of the industry was being formed. There's going to be somebody, a Zumbo, a Dick Metcalf, a Smith & Wesson. Somebody was going to test the boundaries, and then probably the industry was going to respond the way it did. Do I think that, if your question is did I do it all? No. I just happened to be sitting in the chair and be a player in it when this larger thing was happening to the country that probably something like that was going to materialize, yeah. Once I decided that I would no longer just devote unthinking loyalty, I decided the other thing I was going to do is I was going to stand up for the things that I cared about most, and those just happened to be most of them on the Democratic side of the aisle, certainly on conservation and environment, and I really leaned into those. And so as Obama starts to lead in the polls, my staff didn't quite know what to do with me, and I was careful not to let those politics leak out in the larger ethos, because you literally in the firearms industry could get fired for having it be known that you were a supporter of Barack Obama, Then, and I started to see some unbelievable ugliness, most of it laced with racial invective, in an open way in the industry that's really tough for most people to grasp. But you would see dealers that you sold to or people that you knew, and they would say things with racial hyperbole that you can't hardly imagine being said, but it was just out in the open, like that, insert bad term here. is going to outlaw our guns, and it was just like an everyday thing. And I didn't know where the country was going, but I saw the way in which the NRA was fueling that and advertising to it and marketing to it, and the way the industry was benefiting from it and then fueling the marketing and the sort of unending spiral that it was taken. And all I remember feeling is like, I don't know where this is going, but it's like, it's going somewhere bad. I didn't know Trump was coming. I didn't know January 6th was going to happen. I didn't know armed men were going to march into the Michigan Capitol. I didn't foresee any of that. I just knew that what once was an industry where, for a few years, where the industry itself would not allow tactical gear to be displayed in the SHOT Show. I tell a story in the book about a shooting event we did on a ranch in Kansas where a writer brought an AR-15 in 2004, brought an AR-15 to the event, and all of the industry wise men there, all these writers and editors and executives made him put it away. Not because it was law.
Right.
But so it went from that to like the industry never selling more than 7 million guns before Barack Obama was elected to selling more than 16 million after he was elected. And so much of it, that didn't bother me. It was the reasons that bothered me. It was that so much of it happened because of this irrational fear about a first black president, or the conspiracy theory that he was going to rewrite the Constitution, or like, I just didn't understand those reasons, and I knew it was dangerous to pour fuel on that stuff, and I saw the industry pouring fuel on it. It was a weird combination of the NRA realizing that all drove political advantage, and at the same time, the industry realizing that the same thing that drove political advantage also drove business, and those things kind of conjoined to what we have now. And that's why, like 2020 to me is so distressing. I guess I worried that we had an industry and an entity that profited from the worst outcomes in society. So the more racial invective there was, the more guns were sold. The more fear was in society, the more guns were sold. The more Barack Obama was conspiratorial, going to rewrite the Constitution, the more guns were sold. And I worried about the feedback loop where the industry would want to create more of that because it was more profitable, and the NRA was fueling it the whole time because it can make people vote in irrational ways. And so, heck, I was trying to build a gun company, so I wanted to sell more guns, but I didn't want to sell them because people were fearful of a black president. I didn't want people to buy them because they believed in conspiracy theories. I didn't, and it's that way in which things were happening that really started to scare me. They can get a lot fucking worse. And I'm fearful that I've spent some time here in the last few weeks and months telling people that I kind of anticipate they're gonna get worse. There's a subset of gun culture now that believes that it's their patriotic duty, and it may even be preferable to engage in some sort of bloody civil war. There's a twisted sense of what guns have become to so many people that they literally almost wish for a time when they can use the guns to overthrow a democracy. And I see a lot of overt marketing to that sort of concept. I hear a lot of I hear a lot of things now repeated and written out in the open that if they did happen 10 years ago, they were like in weird 4chan chat rooms and things like that. Now they're out in the wide open, and I'm worried that they're gonna come to fruition. I think the byproducts of this culture that is created is directly contributing to things like Buffalo and Uvalde and Highland Park, because these are for the most part troubled young men, teenagers in many instances, who have been told that they too can be a tactical badass and solve their problems by grabbing this gun and solving their problems. And there's a direct line to the marketing and the sort of divisive, fearful, conspiratorial political rhetoric that the industry is engaged in. And I don't see any of that lessening right now. I see it getting worse. And I have to assume that if we're spending millions of dollars on marketing, it's going to create outcomes, and I'm worried about the outcomes it's going to create. And what I've witnessed and seen in the gun industry and NRA is you can always rationalize single bad actors. A kid at Sandy Hook, it's a single bad actor. A guy in a hotel room in Las Vegas, it's a single bad actor. A guy in Sutherland Springs, Texas, single bad actor. Like you can rationalize that away, right? What cannot be rationalized away by a lot of people is the degree to which guns and gun radicalization are now taking center stage in basically domestic terror organizations and this sort of anti-democratic authoritarian movement. So Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, Boogaloo Boys, every single one has firearms radicalization as its very central organizing principle. And that is tough. That's much tougher for gun people to rationalize away. My point is that I think that distresses people a lot more than the single bad actors things, as horrific as they are. Obviously, those groups are quite a small subset in the slice of a single percent. I mean, tiny. The amount of people who now identify with this sort of hell no Second Amendment absolutism sort of thing is growing, and I'm worried about that. It's not 50% of America. I doubt it's 20% of America. But if it's 10, and it might be, it's way too much.
It's a lot.
And they're the loudest. They have the biggest mics. And importantly, they instinctually know how to intimidate people into believing that they're much larger and much more numerous and much more powerful than they actually are. And that's a recipe for a growing movement that is frightening, right? These people that like guns, these people that identify with guns, the people that, not all, but a lot of Americans, guns and gun ownership are emblematic of something like Campbell's soup can Americana, man. Like, it's not bad, don't demonize them. To start off, as I often hear, like, I don't understand how anybody could ever own a gun, or why would you want them? I'm like, well, okay, not the most effective argument in this country, right? I'm not saying that Democratic leaders do that all the time, but I think understanding where other people, where people like this, or people like me, frankly, come from, I think there's a lot we can learn about the way Democrats and progressives meet up with people. And I guess that's one thing that if there's, besides my boys being proud of me, the way in which progressives and Democrats have become comfortable speaking to me or with me or engaging with me about guns, like, I'm really proud of that because I'm not threatening to them. I was on the phone with a parent who lost her little boy in Sandy Hook this morning, and I tried to explain to him, like, there's a saying that we have in elk hunting, you know, you hunt elk where they are, not where you want them to be. And I think a lot of times people in political movements want elk to be at a certain place, but they're actually over here. And the thing that I've seen is that gun people are patriotic. A lot of them are good patriotic Americans too, and they're worried about the way gun radicalization and gun culture has been spun into something that now threatens the very existence of our democracy. That worries them. So I'm like, okay, meet them there. I know we wanted them to be worried about Sandy Hook. They weren't. They should have been. I get it. They weren't. They're worried about this. I'm worried about this. Aren't we all worried about this? So that has been a point of, like, sort of meeting of the minds, agreement. A lot of coalitions have been built by that. And I think that's why you saw a movement. I mean, you had 65 senators come together to vote yes on a bill. Mm-hmm. Shit, man, 65 senators couldn't vote yes on if potato chips were good, you know? I mean, but they voted yes on this.
Yeah.
That tells you that something is bubbling up. I think, like, there is no easy answer to your question, and there's no easy answer to the problem. We got into this through 30 years of incremental bad decisions that made things marginally worse, and we've got to start making decisions that make things marginally better. I think the bill signed recently will help do that. And I think that was a very important part of the assault weapons ban, more than, it didn't really ban AR-15s, but what it did was codify a societal stigma about what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable. We have these norms, just like we used to have in our politics, what you thought was okay and what you thought was decent and what you thought wasn't. And those sorts of norms and lines across which we should not step have just been totally erased, they feel like to me. Like anything's okay, you know, scream at, I've seen school board meetings here, like good, well-meaning, dedicated, volunteer public servants being screamed at as if they're like Satan himself over just trying to do the right thing for kids. Like our norms of decency have been totally erased. So I think we have to insist, we could start with guns and let's just agree that marketing a Boogaloo Boys rifle, not okay. Armed intimidation, screaming at kids at a Black Lives Matter rally, not okay. You know, marching on the Capitol with come and take it AR-15 flags, not okay. And we can stand up, we all have people in our circles that could use a reminder of that. And to your example about the conservation meetings, I know our people don't like to confront people. I know they don't, but we're going to have to find the courage to do it.
How do you get the industry to come at this a different way when it's been so effective and lucrative?
Well,
and the NRA.
In a democracy like ours, there's two ways to do it. It's either voluntary or it's regulatory. So if it can't be voluntary, which it once was not very long ago, then there's going to have to be more regulation. And that's one of the points I tried to make to my gun industry friends. Like, there are things that we know we're doing that are wrong, that are going to lead to bad things. We should get them under control. Like, you should think about this as a pro-gun thing. You should want to do this before it gets regulated on you. You should want to do the responsible thing like the industry used to do before it's regulated upon us.